Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. Glad to have you with me. I know it's Friday. Happy Friday, everybody. Normally on Fridays we have Christian Toto, but we're trying to work out details between iHeart and the podcast and what Christian can and cannot do. So I'll leave it at that, except to say that anyone who is listening to the podcast, if they would like to sponsor the Hollywood and Toto segment on either the podcast or preferably perhaps on terrestrial radio on 630 KHAL, by all means, send me an email, send me a note or whatever, and we'll figure out a way to get you hooked up with the right people so that we can get Christian back on air as soon as possible. So I can't fill in for Christian, but Christian did want me to cover this, and of course I think it's worthy of covering it. The first show of the new season of The View. Yes. Whoopi Goldberg starts off. You may have heard that the actress in Will and Grace, Deborah Messing, and her co-star Eric McCormick had tweeted a few days ago, actually last weekend, that the media should be printing lists of donors to Trump's fundraiser in Hollywood because they want to know who they are and they don't want to work with them. Now, what I find funny about this is, unless everybody was giving less than $200 or less, anybody that contributes to a campaign and they give more than $200, that's reported to the Federal Election Commission. Now, you might be able to give to a 537, one of these dark money committees, and your name is never disclosed. But if you're at a fundraiser or you just write a check and your check is $201, it's going to be reported to the Federal Election Commission. But I know that, the internet's hard and it might be difficult for an actress like Deborah Messing or Eric McCormack to figure out, hey, if I want to know who was at the fundraiser, instead of crowdsourcing it, I could just go online and find myself. Well, anyway, after making a joke about it being a white list because they claim that apparently only white people support Donald Trump. Sorry, all you black people and Asian people and, brown-skinned colored people and everybody else that support Donald Trump. You don't realize this, but you're not allowed to support Donald Trump. Here's how the bit goes. It's fascinating because sometimes, and I think more often than not now, I don't have empirical data to support this, but I am beginning to believe that there is an underground of not necessarily conservative Hollywood or television and movie actors and actresses or talk show hosts like Whoopi Goldberg, but generally in that genre of media people, I'm beginning to think, and look, I'm not trying to claim it's majority, and I don't think it's a huge number, but I am beginning to believe that there are more numbers of libertarian / conservative kind of, wait a minute, aren't we the original group that advocated for, free speech and free sex and free love and everything else back in the 60s, and now we're trying to shut down speech? It goes like this.
Individuals, I think that then you're stalking and you're starting to endanger that person's life. So I don't approve of that.
What about the fact that those donations are already public record?
Well, that's something else. If they're out there and they look them up, fine. But so what are you saying? So Deborah can say, I don't want to work with those people. It's already out there and I know who they are?
Yeah, if Deborah looks them up and it's already a matter of public record,
that's her right.
Why aren't you proud of your support? If you're proud enough to pay the money and donate. I mean, I'm not condoning any violence against anyone. But if you're proud enough to donate, then
listen,
why not?
Last time people did this, people ended up killing themselves.
Yeah.
This is not a good idea, okay?
Listen,
your idea of who you don't want to work with is your personal business. Do not encourage people to print out lists, because the next list that comes out, your name will be on, and then people will be coming after you. No one. Nobody. We had something called the blacklist, and a lot of really good people were accused of stuff. Nobody cared whether it was true or not. They were accused, and they lost their right to work.
I want to pause it because she's on a roll, and I hate to pause it when Whoopi's on a roll, but she's absolutely right in this regard. You are accused. She's making the point that an accusation is not the same as a conviction. But that's where we live today. Now, you and I don't live in that spot, but when you look over your shoulder, if you look around you, if you can look behind you, everywhere you look, we now live in a society where the mere accusation alone is enough to destroy people's lives. And Whoopi she is serious, and she's passionate about this, and she's absolutely correct.
We had something called the blacklist, and a lot of really good people were accused of stuff. Nobody cared whether it was true or not. They were accused, and they lost their right to work. You don't have the right in this country. People can vote for who they want to. That is one of the great rights of this country. You don't have to like it, but we don't go after people because we don't like who they voted for. We don't go after them that way. We can talk about issues and stuff, but we don't print out lists. And I'm sure you guys misspoke when you said that because you...
I'm sure you guys misspoke. No, they didn't misspeak. Because if you're not steeped in the culture of free speech, innocent until proven guilty, if you're not steeped in the culture that has made America the greatest country in the history of civilization, then you are a useful idiot, and you do say dumbass things like, I want everybody to print a list of who attended that fundraiser, because if there was somebody there, if some gaffer was there, or some cameraman was there, or some director happened to be there, the whole gamut of people involved in the production of movies and television, if any of them were involved, I don't want to work with them. Now, I'd like to see them actually put that into practice, because most of these people, regardless of how much money they have, they want more money. And I really doubt that Deborah Messing would turn down a job because somebody on the crew, or somebody that's in costume designing or makeup, or the director, or an executive producer, or anybody else, because they were at that fundraiser, is she going to turn down the opportunity to make X number of dollars, whether that's hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, not counting residuals? Is she going to turn that down because somebody went to a fundraiser? I think she's full of crap. I don't think she'd ever do it. This is all about trying to get their attention.
It sounded like a good idea. Think about it. Read about it. Remember what the blacklist actually meant to people. And don't encourage anyone to do it.
Good for her. Good for Whoopi. Now, again, this is kind of like, a broken clock is right twice a day. And this is probably the same thing with Whoopi, because she'll probably go off the deep end on something later on. But I'll take it. Any opportunity that I see where someone on the left, someone who is, and I kind of believe this about Whoopi Goldberg, I think she's a traditional liberal. Now, she may believe in climate change, and she may think we need to quit eating meat, or we need to quit doing whatever. She may actually think or believe that in her heart of hearts, but she's not actually out pushing that all of the time. But anybody who recognizes that this is a dangerous precedent, and quite frankly is stupid, and also a recognition of history going back to the McCarthy era, you have to give her kudos. So there, happy Friday, kudos to Whoopi Goldberg. I'll be right back. I know you've probably heard enough hurricane coverage that you don't want to hear anything else, but Hurricane Dorian is now whipping South Carolina. It's now a Category 2 hurricane. It was producing winds of 110 miles an hour yesterday. It was about 50 miles southeast of Charleston. It was moving northeast up the coast at about 8 miles an hour. And the National Hurricane Center had said on Thursday that it would probably continue to slowly move in that same direction. Hurricane force winds extended 60 miles out from the center of the storm. It had weakened slightly from a Category 3. Forecasters expected the storm to continue to weaken in coming days, but warned, of course, as they always do, that it remains powerful and dangerous. And then we get the report that low-lying streets in Charleston and elsewhere in South Carolina's low country were flooding on Thursday, howling winds, all of this is going on, transformers blowing out, schools, government offices, all the businesses were closed down, roads were empty. And in a tweet from the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, do not leave your home unless your life is in danger there. There's about 225,000 customers without power in North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia. I say all of that because back when I was on Fox News and Fox Business over the weekend, I kept predicting, and I'm not a meteorologist, and I'm not trying to play one here, but I kept looking at the models, and this is where I want to get to. I want to get to the models for a second. But I kept saying if you look at the models, regardless of which model you buy into, one that has the most westerly drift or the one that has the most eastwardly drift, the hurricane was going to move up the Atlantic coast. And it was going to hit Georgia and it was going to hit South Carolina, probably hit the Outer Banks. And I pointed out that there was going to be a lot of flash flooding and that can oftentimes be as, or if not more dangerous than hurricane winds or storm surge. And of course, it turns out that's exactly what it did. But nobody ever talks about the models. And I want to put the models in perspective for just a moment. Models are computer generated. They take all of the data, wind currents, ocean temperature, high pressure systems, low pressure systems, the heat of the day, the cooling of the night, winds, where the hurricane came from, what will it do once it makes landfall. They plug all of this data into these computers, and different places have different models. That's why when you look at, if you go to the National Hurricane Center's website, which you can find on the NOAA website, they'll have, and I'm just guessing, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm just guessing right now, but they'll have anywhere from 6 to a dozen different models showing what any particular hurricane may or may not do. And from all of those models, they develop what is called the cone of probability. And this cone is just like an ice cream cone. It starts out, kind of at a point where the eye of the hurricane currently resides, and then it kind of spreads out and opens up almost like looks like a hot air balloon. That's the cone of probability, meaning that the hurricane could go anywhere within that. And oftentimes, the hurricane completely deviates from all of the models. What's my point? Models are just that. Models are just predictors based solely on two things: the data that is put into the computer model, and then the experts who analyze what the computer spits out after compiling and analyzing all of that data. Then some expert, some meteorologist, looks at that model and looks at that result and says, well, then human intuition tells me it's going to do X. And of course, as I've said 1,000 times, hurricanes and Mother Nature are going to do what Mother Nature and hurricanes want to do. So we can do all the prediction and all the modeling that we want. And it's very unscientific, even though it is scientifically based on, well, we put all this data in, we looked at this and we looked at that. Ultimately, all of that data has to be interpreted. The same is true with climate change. Now, if we can't get accurately what a hurricane is going to do, and the models for a hurricane, which let's not count the tropical depression that forms off the Horn of Africa. Let's focus instead on when it finally gets over into the Atlantic and it gets close to the Caribbean or to the eastern seaboard. And at that point, if it's a hurricane and we start doing all this modeling, actually they're doing the modeling way back when, but the models that people care about are the models when, hey, it's going to hit me. The point is this: if we can't even get that right, something that is finite, localized, somewhat predictable based on history, if we cannot get that right, then why is it that we think that modeling for something that's going to occur 3, 4, 5, 10 days out, well, we can't rely on that. We have to have a cone of probability because it could do this or it could do that. Why then, when we put modeling in for climate change, do we say, oh, well, we can say with certainty that man is causing X, and if we don't do something within 12 years, then we're all going to die? It's insane. It's utterly insane what we're doing. But that's what we do. And I just want you to think, because obviously Hurricane Dorian is going to stay in the news for a while, and I just want you to think about those models. And if you have a chance, I'd actually go look at the models. I'd go look at them, then I'd ask myself the question, you're right. If they can't get this right, why do we believe that they can get something right that is 10, 12, 30 more years off into the future? And for those of you who are close to the same age that I am, or older, or maybe a little bit younger, doesn't make any difference. You know that we've now been through the time when we were told that we were all going to freeze to death, and then we were all going to burn up. And now, I don't know what the current one is. They keep telling us that it's climate change because they don't want to use global warming, because there really hasn't been any warming. As I've told you in previous episodes of the podcast, there really hasn't been any warming. So what do? Well, we rely on models. And the models for those long-term projections are even more subject to human interpretation, more subjected to whatever the model wants to spit out based on the data put in. And I don't think we ought to be relying on it. Absolutely should not be relying on it. Hang on, I'll be right back. Yesterday on air, I happened to mention that there, and I forget what was in the context of. I'm sure it was about the Second Amendment and how Beto O'Rourke wants to take away our AR-15s and do a forced buyback of guns, and then they all want this enhanced or comprehensive background check. And I pointed out to some extent, not to some extent, I pointed out to a great extent, how I've in the past have participated in the private transaction, private purchasing and sale of firearms without going through a background check. And that if there was now a federal law that required me that before I could sell my buddy or my brother or anybody else, sell you a gun, somebody that I know, that I'm going to march down and spend the extra money to do a background check, it's just not going to happen. And so, yes, I would become a criminal, but that's the purpose. The purpose of doing something like comprehensive background checks is so that you can make innocent people into criminals. That's what most progressives want to do. If you really look at their adoption of laws, the laws are in part to be completely objective. They are designed in part to try to stop criminal activity. But the other reason oftentimes that these laws are adopted is to make criminals out of the innocent, so that you would then be forced to take action or not take action, depending on how the law is written, in order to get the law is designed to get you to do something or to not do something. And in the case of comprehensive background checks, in which the private sale of a gun between two friends or between family members is designed to make you a criminal, if instead of, it's like doing a straw purchase. How many of you have ever done this kind of straw purchase? You know that your wife or your husband wants a gun for Christmas. Maybe your wife wants a little pink Glock. And so you go down to your favorite gun store and you find a pink Glock. They take it out of the cabinet, you play with it, you look at it, you check it out, it's exactly what you want. You tell them you want to buy it. You fill out your background check paperwork, and on that you say that you are not purchasing this gun in order to transfer it to somebody else. Well, that's exactly what you're doing. You're going to wrap it up with a really nice bow. You're going to put it under the Christmas tree, and your wife's going to open it up, and she's going to be so excited and so happy, and she's going to love the little pink color that it is, and she's going to put it in her purse, and the gun becomes hers. Didn't you just do a straw purchase? Some lawyers would argue yes, some lawyers would argue no. I would argue that in a strict interpretation of the law, I have committed a crime by doing a straw purchase. Now, some would argue, well, you haven't done it because you are still the owner of the gun. Well, what if we get divorced? What if we become estranged? What if the wife decides that no, and in fact, she decides that after a year, she's going to go sell the gun? Well, wait a minute, if I own the gun, how can she sell the gun? You see the insanity of what we're doing? But in the discussion of that, I wanted to point out that in making innocent people criminals, they ignore the fact that the criminals who now use guns illegally will continue to use guns illegally. And I happen to mention the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Statistics. Based on a 2016 survey of prison inmates, about 21%, 1 in 5, of all state and federal prisoners told or admitted that they had possessed or carried a gun when they committed their crime for which they were serving time in prison. About 13% of all prisoners had used a gun by either showing, pointing, or discharging it while committing the crime for which they were in prison, and fewer than 1 in 50, less than 2%, of all prisoners had actually gone to a retail source and bought legally and possessed, carried, or used that gun during the crime for which they were in prison. Less than 2%. Meaning that 98% of all the other goobers that are in jail where they used a gun didn't do that. Now, do you think that just because we enact a law that says if you conduct a private transaction that these thugs are then going to go down, they're going to be on Federal Boulevard in Denver, Colorado. They're looking for a snub-nosed 38 because they got to go cap somebody. And so they check around and somebody tells somebody to tell somebody, and they meet somewhere in a back alley somewhere, and the guy opens his trunk or gets out of the car, shows him what he's got, and he goes, yeah, I'd like to have that. Can we now go down to XYZ gun store and do the transfer? What do you think the guy selling the gun's going to do at that point? And what thug do you think is going to say, oh, by the way, yeah, I really do like that snub nose. Oh, by the way, I noticed that you got the serial number filed off. That's great. How many times has it been used? Well, it's never been used. It was owned by a grandmother, and we stole it from her. Oh, perfect. That's even better. Now, can we go down and do a legal, lawful transfer of this gun? Of course not. They want the cash, and they're going to move on. It's a way of making criminals out of innocent people and totally, completely, unequivocally ignoring that the bad guys are going to continue to get their guns. Now, here's the reality of where we are in the United States. 300 million plus guns in the hands of private owners. As I've said before, there's a part of me that would like to see, maybe I don't really want to be around when it happens, because I really do think that will be the start of a revolution in this country, but I kind of would like to observe or imagine in my little addled brain, some Democrat gets elected president. They get control of the House and the Senate, and forget that because somebody. Here's the example I want to give. They're going to make it illegal to do these kinds of transfers, or they're going to impose a mandatory buyback, or they're going to impose an assault weapon ban, which I guess you have to turn in your golf clubs and your baseball bats, and your butcher knives and everything else. Now, all of that I know, from a practical point of view, is going to get challenged in a federal district court somewhere. It'll go to, and I don't even think the Ninth Circuit would uphold some of these draconian measures that they're proposing, and it would eventually get to the U.S. Supreme Court. And considering the makeup of today's Supreme Court, I think it would be struck down as a blatant violation of the Second Amendment. But put all of that aside for a moment, and let's just go into fantasy land for a second. And imagine that all of those examples I just gave you, that they get the House and the Senate and the presidency, and Beto O'Rourke is the president, and they get an assault weapon ban, whatever that means. I guess, I don't know, your over-under or your automatic shot, your semi-automatic shotgun, your AR-15, because those are scary-looking guns. Any other semi-automatic weapon you have are going to be under the assault weapon ban. And then they're going to force you, by statute, to sell those guns. Do you really believe? Now, I know that, yes, some sheriffs in some major cities, some major counties, would actually try to enforce that. Obviously to the detriment of both the civilian population and to those law enforcement officers who, as they try to take guns away from innocent, law-abiding people, are going to end up DRT, dead right there. And the war will begin. But there will also be sheriffs around the country who will say, "Nah, I'm not going to do a thing." And then you'll have that battle. It's easy to get spun up about this stuff. And I'm not saying that we should not get spun up about it, because when you live in a constitutional republic, vigilance is required 100% of the time to keep the insidious, almost, what's the word I'm looking for when you have cancer that has metastasized policies of the Democrats that want to, at every turn, seem to want to take away our constitutional rights. They want to denigrate our natural rights and somehow convince us that we need to live in a more secure society and that security is more important than liberty. I find that fascinating because I'd like to ask the people of Hong Kong, who understand exactly the kind of security state that is just north of their city-state, China, in which there is overwhelming security. They obviously don't want to live there. They'd prefer to live in Hong Kong, where they have liberty and freedom. I'm always fascinated, and I'm reminded of a cartoon that, I've dug through my archives trying to find this cartoon forever. But it showed a cartoon of people holding an American flag and people holding a USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republic flag, the hammer and sickle. And both parties, both groups of people, as they hold their flag, are running in opposite directions. Now imagine that they're running in opposite directions, but they're transposed in the position on the cartoon, so it looks like they're going to have to go through each other to get what they're scrambling for. And those holding the American flag are running, let's say, from left to right, trying to get to security. Those holding the hammer and sickle, the Russian flag, the USSR flag, are running from right to left, trying to get to freedom. And so as we look around the world, there are all of these countries and there are all of these people, and I think about the people in Hong Kong in particular, or the people in Venezuela, Cuba, China, Russia, who yearn to be free at the same time that in this nation, we are absolutely bastardizing individual liberty at every single turn. And I dare say, I'd hate to do this national poll, but I dare say that there might be more people than we expect that would say, oh yeah, security is much more than freedom, and I'm more than willing to give up my freedom in order to not be scared. Because when you listen to the news, it's designed to do nothing but scare us about everything. And I'm sick of it. Before we get to a taxpayer relief shot, I want to remind everybody, if you're listening to me on terrestrial radio, which you can now do Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. on 630 KHAL, you can listen live on the iHeart app. You can't download the podcast yet because it has to propagate through the system. I don't know why it takes so long, but it does. But the podcasts are on Spreaker, just like this podcast is on Spreaker. But eventually you'll be able to get the radio podcast on the iHeart app and iTunes also. But I would encourage you to download and listen to the podcast of the radio program. And then, of course, you know what to do here. Download on the iHeart app, download on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And then join me on social media. You could do that simply by going to michaelbrowntoday.com, michaelbrowntoday.com. All of the social media icons are there across the bottom. Follow me on Twitter. Subscribe to the YouTube page. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever it is. Follow me everywhere on social media. Because as we get both the radio program spun up and start tying this podcast to the radio program, I'm going to finally get back and get more active on all the social media platforms, which I know thrills all of you. I don't know why, but I know it thrills some of you and it irritates others. And if that's the case, then I'm succeeding. Now, a taxpayer relief shot. And I'm going to use this one because I think this is a classic taxpayer relief shot that they always leave me scratching my head. This one comes to us from Ryrie or Ryrie. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Idaho, R-I-R-I-E. Not sure I've ever been to Ryrie or Ryrie. A 53-year-old man was killed after a night-long showdown with the Popo in Jefferson County, Idaho. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office was called at 8:50 p.m. Tuesday night to this address on a domestic disturbance call. The allegation is that the man had pointed a handgun at his wife and had threatened to shoot her. So she fled the scene. The wife fled the scene. She called the cops. Now, when the cops arrived, the man barricaded himself in the house and shouted out the window at the cops. According to the authorities, he made threats against the officers and refused to come out of the house. Now, let's just stop there for a second because the negotiations went on for about 7 hours until 4 o'clock in the morning when shots were fired, and, of course, he ended up dead right there. Even if you are royally pissed off at your wife or your husband, doesn't make any difference which way this works, and you happen to pull a gun and you happen to threaten your wife or your husband with a gun, you don't actually do anything. You just brandish your weapon. Both parties are yelling and screaming at each other because the pot pies weren't ready or, the steak was overdone or, the beer wasn't cold enough or whatever the reason was. Or I've got a headache. Who knows? You never know what causes a domestic disturbance. So the wife leaves the house, calls the cops. Now, at this point, it's solely a he said, she said, unless, of course, she has video or a recording. It's he said versus she said. Now, oh boy, instead, when the cops show up, instead of having put his gun away, and when the authorities asked him to come out, walked out, and said, what's going on, officers? And the cops would have said, well, now, of course, they probably have their weapons drawn. What's going on, officers? They would have made him get on the ground. They would have handcuffed him. They would have then, but still, if this ever gets to court, it's he said, she said. Yes, we got into a fight that night. Yeah, we yelled at each other. He pulled a gun on me. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. And it goes on like that in the courtroom till the judge pulls his or her hair out. He may have been found guilty of threatening her in some way. She may have been able to get a restraining order. But the point is, he wouldn't be DRT, dead right there. There's something strange about people who, when they're in that state of mind, decide, you know what? Because I've seen this in the movies, I've read about it in the newspapers, I've seen it on the TV, and I know how it turns out. The cops show up, and nobody ever ends up dead. When actually that's what always happens. They barricade themselves in the house. They fire a gun either through the roof or out the window or whatever, and the SWAT team just lets go, and you end up dead. So my advice to all of you goobers out there that are having a domestic disturbance with your spouse, your husband or your wife, whoever makes it out of the house, assuming, now this is a big assumption that they don't have a video or a audio recording of you threatening them with a gun, why don't you just play stupid? Let the cops arrest you. Let them put you in handcuffs. They'll put you in the back of the squad car. You'll get hauled down. You might get a charge filed against you. You're going to be out on bail that night. And instead, this old boy, he's in the morgue with a toe tag, number XYZ2397B. And he's assumed he's assumed room temperature, but the room in the morgue, whatever drawer they've got him in, is probably at about 38 degrees, just like a refrigerator. Good grief. If you don't know why we do taxpayer relief shots, stay tuned to the radio program, because I think I'm going to have to explain to the radio audience why we do taxpayer relief shots. Thanks for listening. Everybody have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you again on Monday.